Hello, and welcome to the Vergecast, the flagship podcast of asterisks and underlines. I'm your friend David Pierce, and today on the show, we're going to talk about Markdown. Now, Markdown is probably very familiar to you if you're like a deep nerd about note-taking apps like I am, and maybe a word you've never even heard of otherwise. If you're in that latter group, don't worry, we're gonna get into it. The way to understand Markdown is basically as a way of writing text that both a computer and a human can understand. So if you're writing words and you want to bold something, right? Rather than go to, file and format and bold, you just put two asterisks at the beginning and at the end of the word. And that tells the computer that this is bold. Markdown is a language that computers understand and know how to translate into other things. It also just looks like emphasis, right? So when you're reading it, you see a word with two asterisks on either side and you go, oh, that's emphasis. You can do underlines for underlines. You can write a link in a specific way so that it can be read by Markdown, so you can see the title of the link and then the URL of the link itself. It's a way of writing text that both computers and humans can understand. It's a very powerful thing, and it is absolutely everywhere. All of a sudden, all of these note-taking apps are using it. Obsidian is a very popular one that lets you write in Markdown, and everything is stored on your computer as Markdown files, which are basically, again, just annotated text files. This is also kind of the lingua franca of the AI industry right now. When you make a Claude.MD file, the MD stands for Markdown. It's a way of writing for the computer that is simple and straightforward and that lots of people understand. Markdown is not just an inherent thing of computers. It was created by a person, and that person is John Gruber, who you might also know as the writer of the blog Daring Fireball. John's going to come on the show, as is Anil Dash, who is a longtime tech executive, was around in the early days of Markdown, and really has seen it grow up into the standard it has become. We're going to talk about where Markdown came from, why it's so important that this thing became a crucial part of the way that we write text on computers, and where we go from here. The conversation is very nerdy. I will just warn you in advance, but I had a really good time, and I think you will too. But first, here's everything else happening on The Verge today. This is 90 Seconds on The Verge for Monday, June 15th, 2026. Fox announced that it's buying Roku in a deal valued at $22 billion. If this deal goes through, it's always a big if, the mishmash of stuff in the combined company would include all of Fox's TV networks, Tubi, Roku's streaming devices, its smart TV software, and the Roku channel. Fox says the plan is to keep Roku as the sort of ubiquitous Switzerland of the streaming industry that it has been, but of course that's what everybody always says and nobody ever means it. In particular, I'm fascinated to see what comes of Tubi and the Roku channel, which would combine to be a very big and very powerful free streaming service. The big news all weekend was the US government's bid to shut down Fable, the new super powerful AI model Anthropic released last week. The government said it was blocking its use by foreign nationals, which turns out to be such a complicated thing to enact that it works as an overall ban. It's not entirely clear that the government can actually do this, but Anthropic did in fact shut off the model. There's so much we still don't know here. Fable is basically the same model as Mythos, which Anthropic said was too dangerous to release a couple of months ago, only with some guardrails. Is it actually a security risk? Who bypassed the guardrails? What happens when they do? Who raised the alarm here? Is this just another strange turn in the fight between Anthropic and the US government over who gets to decide how AI gets used? Like I said, lots of questions. Finally, The Verge's Don Preston reviewed the Honor Magic V6, a foldable phone that accomplishes three very important things. It has a battery that lasts 2 days, it has genuinely good ratings for dust and water resistance, and it is the thinnest foldable phone we've seen yet. It's still $2,000, which means you probably won't buy or ever even see it, but there are good things coming in foldables. You can read more about all of this at theverge.com. That's 90 Seconds on The Verge for Monday, June 15th. All right, let's talk text files. Joining me now, John Gruber, who you've been on the show many times, but never as the inventor of Markdown. Welcome to the Vergecast.
Yes, and finally I'm here for the thing that will go on my tombstone.
I think that's right, and we're going to talk about that. Also here, Anil Dash, you did not invent Markdown, but you've used it once or twice.
When it was created.
That's exactly right. So I think, strangely, I want to talk about a very long time ago, and I want to talk about right now. And those are sort of the two Markdown stories that I'm particularly fascinated by. But for folks who don't know the origin story, John, let's go all the way back to like the early aughts and sort of baby blogger John Gruber. Tell us just the brief story of where Markdown came from.
I went to college in the 90s. I have a computer science degree and graduated in 96, and then was doing freelance graphic design work rather than programming. But with a background in programming and being that age and being a graphic designer, what did I do? I built websites, right? It was sort of the perfect confluence of skills and interests. At least then knew HTML.
Sure.
It was a lot easier.
And had, it's intertwined with what's the origins of Daring Fireball. But I had this inkling to start Daring Fireball like 98, 99 or something, some kind of blog. Because I was a writer. Finally, August 2002 is when I started the site. During the year of 2002, there was this is where Anil comes into play. There was what do I use? What's the CMS I'm going to use? Do I build my own, which I could have done, I still could do, or use one of the things that's out there? And at the time, like WordPress didn't exist yet. And I probably wouldn't have used it anyway. But movable type just came out like the year before.
It was
It kind of immediately took over the blogging world, right? Like movable type at this time was sort of the one you choose if you're going to choose one.
Yeah. And I'd more or less ruled out every other option for a CMS. Okay. And I was like, I gotta build my own. And then movable type was like close enough. And it's like, ooh. And it's like, I know that if I built my own, it would take 10 times longer than I thought it would. But that meant every single post that I wrote on Daring Fireball was written in HTML. And I'd paste HTML into the field for the body of the article. Within a year, I'd really gotten the shits of that.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I just, I knew it. It wasn't the fact that I didn't know it. It's that I didn't like writing it. And so I'd had this series of scripts that was getting ever more complicated on my local machine where I could write in like a proto Markdown and then turn it into HTML at the end and then paste that into movable type. But it turns out I do a lot of editing after I post, so having transferring to HTML and then all subsequent edits have to be in HTML. So I was like, I need to write something like this. And then Dean Allen, who's no longer with us, at textism.com came out with a thing called Textile on 2001, 2002, I don't know, somewhere before Markdown. And I thought about using Textile and I didn't like it enough. And one of Anil's colleagues at Six Apart, a guy named Brad Choate.
Six Apart was the company that made movable type, that content. Right?
Yes, from the company that made movable type. Did the Textile plugin for movable type. And it was complicated because the original was in PHP and needed to be in Perl for movable type. And I knew Brad. And I started sending Brad and Dean sort of suggestions because they were changing some things. And then Dean said to me, this is very important. It was like a seminal moment. And I knew Dean and he was really, really a fan of Daring Fireball. And I was a huge fan of Textism, huge influence on what Daring Fireball still is to this day. And Dean just wrote back to me and said something to the effect, I have the email somewhere, but it's something to the effect of, these are great ideas, but you should just make your own thing. So then I made my own thing.
There are like two competing ideas about what Markdown was supposed to be. And one was like, I want to write something where I can easily type all the characters I need in order to make it readable to the computer. And there was another one that was like, I want to make something that is computer language, but that is readable to humans.
No, that was an overriding goal. And I think truly differentiated Markdown from everything else in the sphere was not focusing on the authorship and the typeability. Even though all the characters are ASCII characters, there's, and I really thought about it because I'm so Mac-centric and it's easy to type, certain character, like option 8 to get a real bullet character. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of easily typed Unicode characters that I thought about putting in the syntax. And I was like, nah, I should just stick to the ASCII ones. But the readability was more important to me than the writability. That it should be that maybe the overriding goal of it is you should be able to print it out in Markdown format and hand it to somebody who's never heard of Markdown, never used a command line, and they can just read it and they would totally understand what you mean. That they'd pick that up very quickly. Like, oh, I get it. These are the words you think are italics. The readability was more important. And it was, A, I thought that was missing in all the other ones. And B, it was driven by the fact that the whole reason I wanted to make it is that HTML was so hard to edit, right? And it's like, once I had it written, it's like optimizing for readability. You read something over and over again. You only type the characters once.
Fair.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important reasons it took off, right? So to sort of John's point, we'd made this tool, movable type that was being used by, at that time, Gawker and Huffington Post, and like all of the big blogs, right? And none of those folks liked HTML. Like, so you had like 2 or 3 people in the office who were like, they really knew HTML, and everybody else was kind of like enduring it. And when we talk about like literally to put a image in a post, right? So they'd be writing about like, Britney Spears was caught at this club doing this, like, which was like half the stories on Gawker at the time. Yeah. And then to put in an image, they're like, this is miserable. And then what was really important too was like when they wrote the post in Markdown, the other person didn't even have to know it was Markdown, right? It was literally what they would have written in an email. And like that, like they said that explicitly. They're like, oh, this is like normal. And like, we don't feel like nerds when we see this. And so that became the default. And that actually was different than textile. Like I just like John, like all of us were such huge fans of Dean. Like he was just one of those super influential early folks that, we were all just like kind of in awe of him. Like he could do it all right and code and whatever. And so like, I wanted like to be like, I did a bunch of posts in textile because I was like, I want to be like Dean, and then I was like, but it just doesn't like, it's not how people write, And so I got to see, so I was in charge of people making plugins basically. And so like we were trying to launch, when you make a platform, you want people to make plugins, and we were really the first tool that had plugins. And so it was like a dream to be like, here's John, and everybody already loved Daring Fireball. Here's John making this thing, and here's Dean the version of Dean's thing. And so you're like, what an embarrassment of riches to have these things that people actually want to use. But it was not even close right out of the gate that people were just using Markdown because they could type something that looked like what they were already writing. They were kind of like, I already know this one, or at least I know 2/3 of it. And then they told us explicitly, like, this works like I work.
So, Anil, I do want to know about the John being John part of this, because I went back and found, John, the first post you wrote, basically sort of launching Markdown to the world. And it just starts with, I've written a tech HTML formatting tool called Markdown, which is now available for download, which gives real like OpenAI saying ChatGPT is a research preview vibes. It's like, hi, I've done this thing that is going to become utterly ubiquitous on the internet. So here it is. You can have it, I guess. But Anil, do you remember this as like, was this like a seismic moment on the internet? Like John Gruber has made a markup language?
No, but it didn't have to be, right? So I think it's hard to explain how different, like what we used to call it the blogosphere, like how different blogs were in the social media world there. Like there was a sense that everybody read every blog every day then. And like that sounds right. And like that sounds like an insane thing to say, but I think there was a couple things that were different. One, like people had RSS readers, so you could kind of keep a track of a lot of stuff, and not everybody updated every day. So you just could see all the updates. It was kind of like, if you had like when Twitter was still Twitter, and you could kind of read all the updates from everybody at a time. And I think the other thing was there was a tool that a researcher named Cameron Marlowe had made called blog decks, and links would float up to the top when they were popular. And so even if you weren't like, if somebody had not been a regular reader of John's blog, if a bunch of people had linked to his post, it would sort of surface up. And there would only be 10 or 15, maybe 20 links that were popular in a day across all blogs. And also, I think another thing that's really kind of impossible to imagine, there was not that much going on in tech, right? Like there wasn't like, here's 50 new phones and, cameras and whatever launching every day. Like it was just like the things that normal people made who were like good hackers was the most interesting things going on in tech. And, that was the other reason that you were following what an individual developer was making, is it was way cooler. I mean, because again, like you were talking about, like, what is Yahoo doing? What is Cisco doing? Like there was no way that was cooler than what John was doing.
But the other thing that Anil hit on was the stuff in tech that was going on was blogging itself. And so that's what we wrote about. And it sounds navel-gazy, but it wasn't, because it really was some of the most interesting stuff going on.
The spirit of everybody was building blocks for everybody else, right? And like that's very, very different than the environment now. Everything was open. Like so almost everything everybody was assuming was going to be open source was going to be, sort of cloned and copied. I think the only thing that kind of has that feeling these days is maybe like MCP, right? Where people are building things that are kind of interoperable between each other. And, when we say blogs, like it sounds very sort of like retrograde, but it is a superset of everything we consider social media today, right? So everything that would be Instagram and everything that would be TikTok and everything that would be WordPress, but like all those things together would all be under this heading. And also when people were building a fundamental component, yeah, it could be Markdown, but also somebody might be inventing podcasting, right, at this time. And somebody might be, inventing so fundamental formats were things that an individual person was capable of creating in a way that would spread that now to like 1 billion users, right?
Yeah.
So like the kinds of things that sort of, so that thing that like a guy, and John's a remarkable guy, but like a guy can make a thing, and then you could imagine, like, I think we could extrapolate maybe millions of people might use it. I don't think maybe like 1 billion people are going to use this, but you couldn't, it wasn't ridiculous at all to be like, I might make a thing and a couple million people might use it. And so like, that's so unfathomable, I think, in the current era, but it was intuitive at that sense that might, at that stage that might happen. So I think that was such a addictive, feeling when you're creating things.
Yeah. So let's jump ahead a bunch here, because I think like fairly quickly, Markdown becomes sort of ubiquitous. I am curious.
I'm going to disagree there.
Really?
It was
okay.
There was a slow burn for a while.
It actually took off from 2004 till like 2010 was very slow and actually very disappointing to me.
Okay.
Like I thought, I'm like convinced. I was like, this is the fucking shit. I'm like, I can't go back. I can't believe more people aren't using this. And then it did. I noticed it just slowly.
I have a concrete
grew.
Example. So we did, Stack Overflow. I knew the founding team and I was on the board, and Stack launched in 2008, I think. And it was controversial that it supported Markdown, right? Because it was like really, that there was a really strong argument. And I think Jeff Atwood, one of the co-founders, had been like, we should do Markdown so they can do fancy formatted answers on, so Stack Overflow is the most popular community for coders to answer each other's questions.
Right. A group of people who in theory would love to write in Markdown.
They're all coders, right? And so like they should know this thing and it's really easy, and they might want to use HTML in their answers and all these kinds of things. So it seems like a straight down the middle, suggestion. And still there was a lot of debate. Well, are people going to know, or are they going to do too much HTML, like all these kinds of things? And of course, like it ended up being wildly popular. People used it all the time, but it was still a controversial thing. And then, I think GitHub was the year after. And it was also the same thing where like, it was not a gimme that they were going to do it. And then of course, both of those sites ended up adding, other flavors or whatever extensions to it. And all those kinds of things.
GitHub was a huge one. It was like a
inflection
step change. Yeah, because they kind of said, hey, if you're using GitHub and you're going to write something in text, it's going to be in GitHub flavored Markdown, and whether you like it or not. And they didn't really ask opinions. And then that kind of forced the technical minded people who I think just basically had the mindset of, I know HTML. I don't need a baby language in front of HTML, right? And they don't, right? I didn't either. It's not that you need it. It's that once you start using it, you're not going to want to go back. It really is one of those things where you have to use it for a while before you see the appeal. Whereas before you use it and you see this is the Markdown and this is the HTML that it will generate, you're like, yeah, I get it, but I don't need that. I could just write the HTML. But then you start using it and you're like, oh, I can never go back. And that's what GitHub kind of did. And it put it in the heads of technical people, and then they became the what do you call it? The evangelists for it.
Yeah. So, but John, that turn you just described, where the technical people get into it, start using it, love it, and become the evangelists, takes a really sort of weird, unexpected turn. And I think I went back and found a blog post you wrote almost exactly a year ago when Apple Notes got Markdown support. And this, I think, one of the questions I was going to ask you is like, what is the moment where you're like, hey, look, I made it. Like we did. I feel like, I don't know how you beat Apple Notes now lets you write in Markdown for your particular version.
No, it doesn't really let you write in Markdown. And I don't think it should. That's the thing. I've gone from, there's like the 3 stages of Markdown. From me, the creator of Markdown, is this, there's a third of its life at this point where I really felt like it wasn't popular enough. Then there's the middle third where I'm like, finally, it's like the people who should be using Markdown are using it, and it's in the places where it should be available. This is great. But the last third of its life has been I'm like, where's the break? This is too much. This is being exposed to people who should have a WYSIWYG thing in front of them.
Yeah. Okay. So this is what I'm getting at, and I think maybe
Right.
Google Docs is a cleaner example of like you can write a Google Doc in Markdown now. It's weird and bad,
horrible.
and I don't suggest doing it, but you can do it. But simultaneously, this thing has happened where a bunch of companies have said, rather than pure WYSIWYG, like you press the button to make it bold, we're going to let you do the carets to make it, or we're going to let you do the asterisk to make it bold. But also, Markdown editor has become a thing, and there was this whole slew of new text editing documents where it was like, actually, the whole point is to expose the formatting structure in front of people, and I sort of see the idea behind that. Like I use Obsidian, which is one of the better known Markdown editors for everything, and their whole idea is this stuff should be readable by lots of apps. We want to build files that aren't proprietary. Like I get all of it. I feel like there's something about that would drive you in particular just completely insane. That like this is just not what Markdown was supposed to be.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I like it, and there's a fine line between it, right? Like, and for example, when I made Markdown, there was no syntax coloring for it, right? It was meant to be self-evident in a text editor with no syntax coloring, just the asterisks and the brackets and the braces, they all speak for themselves, and it still kind of does work that way. But then with syntax coloring, it's a little better, and with syntax styling, it's even better. Like it's nice when your editor actually does italicize the text between the asterisks.
Sure.
It's nice, but it still is a monospaced font, and you delete the asterisks and it deletes the italics. There's a line that gets crossed where it's more of a fundamentally WYSIWYG product, and yet you're typing these characters, but then there's like a view mode and an edit mode, and the view mode makes them go away. And it's like, no, you've gone too far. And it's exactly the sort of product that Markdown. The other thing Markdown was meant as an answer to was, in addition to writing raw HTML, there were the pre-Markdown WYSIWYG HTML editors, and they sounded great, right? It's like, oh, you just hit Command I and you get italics text. But the problem was, how do you go back to the end of an italicized word and you want to add a word, but no, I don't want it to be italics anymore. I want the italics to end. What do I do? Where's the thing? And that's where having little punctuation characters that you can just delete. Either it's there or it's not, and you delete it, and then the italics stops. So I think what Apple did with Apple Notes is actually great, where they didn't turn it into a Markdown editor where you type Markdown, but what they've done is let you copy Markdown out or export as Markdown, which is great. I think that's actually very appropriate for Apple Notes. I'm now like I said, put the brakes on this. Don't expose it to people. People should have the Apple Notes app should just be WYSIWYG, where you just say italics header and it's an actual menu item.
Anil, what do you think of that?
I want to pick whatever torments John the most. I think like the punishment that he deserves. So like the thing John was talking about, like the early visual HTML editors, those are all like the web version of like, Microsoft Word. You move the image and the whole document blows up. Like they were doing the same thing on the web. And so this was sort of the solution to that. But I think, intrinsically, like a good design is one that precludes people from being able to do the worst things. Like it sort of saves them from that, like the most nightmarish situation. And I think that's one of the reasons that Markdown has sort of persevered. Like it's really hard, even with all the different flavors and variants and whatever, to make a Markdown document that doesn't just ultimately work.
Well, I go back and forth on this because I think philosophically, there's an argument to be made that just everyone should learn Markdown because A, it's not that hard.
Teaching
and
in
B,
schools.
it solves a certain set of problems, right? Like I am forever struck by the number of people who still don't know the keyboard shortcuts for copy and paste, right? And like it is undeniably faster to write Markdown than to go looking for the italics button every time you need the italics button. So to me, it's like there's an argument to be made that actually what you invented is the most efficient way to do it, even more efficient than WYSIWYG. And there are still a lot of really broken WYSIWYG editors out there. Yeah. The other part of me is like, well, actually, everybody should just fix their stupid WYSIWYG editors, and this is not a problem that should exist at all. But I am like, I don't know, John, do you have a sort of aversion to the idea of this being like a language that like everyday people should learn and know? Does that feel like a bridge too far to you?
No, but I don't think it should be required, right? And the thing that I'm proudest of, and the thing that I think I've been proven right about, and it skips over some controversy in the middle, is I've never seen it. I'm the creator of what I would consider the canonical Markdown, or I don't know what you want to call it, but like the official, and I stopped dicking around with it. I don't add new features. I'm not saying I never will, but I haven't in decades. I think a lot of other people, if they saw it as a more of a technical thing, they would have been offended by all the various flavors that came out. But I have always been of the opinion, let 1,000 Markdowns bloom. And that it's not a syntax or a language per se, but a convention for writing plain text. It's taking plain text is the technical standard. And there were a bunch of conventions. And the thing that I'm happiest about isn't that Markdown particularly is so popular. It's that the various 100 different ways of italicizing something in plain text, I had strong opinions about those since like the early 90s. And I thought everybody should do it my way and use the asterisks. And then I thought the second best way is the underscores. But all the other ways, people would use the tildes for that. People would use slashes for italics. And I'm like, I wish people would do it my way. And that's really what Markdown has done, is that everybody now, when they decorate plain text, they do it my way. And it's a convention more than a syntax. And all of the popular flavors of Markdown all follow the main conventions. I had to write the original, it's not even a parser, but the original series of regular expressions that turns Markdown into HTML. And I was ruthless on myself by only making it what I wanted to see and write, no matter how hard it was for me to make it the conversion. But really, ultimately, it's a convention, or a series of conventions for how you do things. And those conventions are like everywhere now.
But that's the thing. And that's all we ever have, right? The spec is like ego, right? The web is just a bunch of things we're hoping works this way. Nobody ever follows the spec. Right? The web is all just a bunch of things we slap together. And like, this is the thing that works the way people work. And recognize that from the beginning. So you never had the ego to pretend, I'm going to write this technical spec and everybody's going to follow it. Right. You're like, I hope they like the way I use things and maybe we will all do it this way. Right. And I think the fact that it worked the way people work is why it took off.
Yeah, I love that. All right, real quick, since we all have to go here, I'm curious how it feels then that kind of convention and that sort of the thing you built is now the like official language of every AI tool everywhere on Earth. Like, this is the most mainstream in a certain way that Markdown files have ever been, right? People are out here writing Claude.MD files for themselves all the time. I guess A, did you get a phone call about this? No. And B, how do we feel about this sort of next turn in the Markdown story?
No phone call and unfortunately no royalty check.
That may be the real bummer here.
I guess it's like, it's surprising, and I get, and I'll get more once this episode comes out, sure. And I welcome it. I do. I've gotten hundreds of emails and DMs over especially the last 6 months or so, from people saying exactly what you just said there, David. Like, how does it feel that it's like the lingua franca of like this huge new groundbreaking breakthrough technology? Weird, a little gratifying, and while I don't profess to be an expert on LLMs, I understand them well enough that I'm not surprised, because they're pattern matching and pattern predicting based on a corpus of, at least in their ability to emit Markdown, forget about image and video generation, but a corpus of text that was produced for humans to read. So LLMs consume text trying to match patterns the way humans do. And so the fact, going back to your question, that I tried, my number one priority for Markdown was to make it readable, is that it is, and readable to someone who doesn't even know what Markdown is exactly how LLMs parse text, like that they can parse noisily written text. Somebody can just bang away in a Facebook text input field that doesn't support anything like formatting and just use weird punctuation characters to sort of fake underlines or something. And LLMs will parse that. Well, that's what Markdown is. So of course LLMs really like it. And they like sending it too, because it's lightweight and fast, and it's like just little characters. It's not complicated. So for example, Somebody did some studies. It's much better at LLMs, I think to this day are still better at emitting Markdown than they are at JSON, because JSON has very persnickety rules. Like a JSON file, you get a character wrong and then the whole file is bad. Markdown, if you forget to end an italics run, who gives a crap? Right? Yeah. Doesn't matter. It's still good. And so LLMs making one little tiny mistake or something in the Markdown they admit, it's still fine. Right? So that forgiving nature that is forgiving for humans also works for LLMs. But it's kind of amazing, because I certainly never envisioned it. I just wanted to blog and have a good format for my writing. Really.
Totally.
I'm less forgiving than John. I think Sam Altman should send John $100 million.
Yeah, just give or take.
I couldn't agree more. But I am curious real quick, Anil, before we have to go here, does this feel like a good direction for like technology and the web, that Markdown is becoming ever more ubiquitous this way?
I think so, especially because it's showing a new generation of creators and coders that what actually makes the web move forward is what individuals create. Right. And I think the more they take that lesson away and they're like, oh, the guy who writes about Apple made this. Right. And if they sort of get that lesson in the back of their head and hear these kinds of stories and are like, the thing that we all use wasn't made by one of these giant $1 trillion companies. That is actually the most important thing that they can sort of learn from it. Not just using the format, but like maybe they could make one of these specs too, one of these formats too. I think that actually like being in the back of their head and be like, how come I would never learn that? Like there will be people who got, the good degree from Stanford that were never taught where the format that they use comes from. And maybe that should raise some questions for them about the history they were told about how the whole industry works. That's a really good thing.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. All right, we got to get out of here. Thank you both for being here. This is very fun. This is like, we could talk, we're going to come back and just like litigate which does 1 asterisk and which does 2, but we'll do that another time. Thank you both for being here. All right, that's it for the show. Thank you to John and Anil for being here, and thank you, as always, for listening. As always, if you want to send us emails, you can always email us, vergecast@theverge.com. If you want to call in with some questions or thoughts or feedback, 866-VERGE11 is the hotline. Find me on social. Find us anywhere on The Verge. We're not hard to get in touch with, and we absolutely love hearing from you about everything. Also, the best thing you can do to support all of this is to subscribe to The Verge, theverge.com/subscribe. It gets you ad-free versions of all of our podcasts, including this one. It gets you all of our exclusive newsletters, including my newsletter, Installer, which selfishly I think is very good. It gets you all of our coverage of Markdown and everything else. theverge.com/subscribe. It makes sure we get to keep doing all of this. Thank you to everybody who subscribes. We appreciate you. The Vergecast is a Verge production and part of the Vox Media Podcast Network. The show is produced by Eric Gomez, Brandon Kiefer, Travis Larchuk, and Aaron Locascio. We will see you tomorrow. Rock and roll.